Okay, so it's not a conspiracy theory. It's pretty obvious it's not a conspiracy theory. Now, what do we do about this stuff? Well, before we get into specific solutions, I need to cover some fundamentals, because if I start talking about solutions, then if I don't explain some of these fundamentals, it'll sound like a bunch of nonsense to you. So once you understand some of these basics, it'll be much clearer to you. So one of these fundamentals is understanding what are known as monoatomic elements, also known as Ormes or Ormes, which is an acronym for orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements. And what the heck does that mean, right? Well, it turns out that certain elements on the periodic chart, the platinum group metals, gold, silver, mercury, copper, iodine, a few others, normally we're familiar with these metals, and they look metallic. They have their usual traits of metals, and however, you can run them through certain processes and convert them into white ceramic powders. And what you do, you can use either photosynthesis or vortexing these elements in magnetic fields in water, or fermentation, or some alchemical processes and laboratory processes. You can basically break these metals into individual atoms, which according to conventional science, doesn't happen in nature. It only occurs in laboratories and under special conditions. But in fact, these monoatomic elements, these individual discrete atoms of these elements, these minerals, they are in our bodies. They're in all living organisms. They're in plants. They're in microbes. They're in soil. They're in ocean water. They're in rock. They're in all kinds of natural conditions. And we can do things to use these because they're extremely healing, as it turns out. But when you convert these metals, even liquid mercury, when you convert them into individual atoms of the metal, they all become these white ceramic powders, and they all become non-toxic and healing. So even liquid mercury, which is very, very toxic, when it's in monatomic form, it's actually very healing. And there are actually videos of Indian swamis and gurus on YouTube taking herbs and mixing them with liquid mercury and converting it into this white ceramic powder. And I believe the way that works is these monoatomics can hide inside of matter, and they're not identifiable by our usual forms of analysis. And so when they're hiding in these materials and you mix them with other Ormus elements or materials that contain Ormus elements, they will bond with the Ormus hiding in the materials and then convert to these white ceramic forms. So it's really weird that you can take like herbs and mix it with liquid mercury and convert it to a white ceramic powder, but in fact that's what happens. Now these monoatomic elements are superconductors, and they're multidimensional, which means that they're really weird. They're not like conventional three-dimensional matter. Part of them are regular three-dimensional matter, but part of them are simultaneously existing in other dimensions of time and space. And this was proven by some of the top labs in the world, by a man named David Hudson, who rediscovered these in more recent years in the United States and spent $8 million with the finest labs in the world testing to figure out what these things were. And what they found was, for example, when you take these monoatomic powders and you heat them up, they will disappear from visual range. They will just disappear right before your eyes, but they're still there because they will act on things. Like if you put them on a scale and heat them up, they'll disappear and their weight will disappear along with them. But they don't just, the weight doesn't just go to zero, it'll actually go negative because they become anti-gravitational. And so they'll actually pull up on the scale and go negative on the scale. So they have a lot of weird properties like that. Being superconductors, they're anti-gravitational, they conduct electricity with zero resistance, and they have other properties as well. They resist magnetic fields. They create superconducting fields that can have interesting effects. And they're extremely sensitive to fields, about electromagnetic fields. So for example, the energies coming to Earth, cosmic radiation and solar radiation and such that's coming down from the earth, where these minerals are present in living organisms and in soil and water and such, they're actually picking up these extremely weak fields from other planets and suns and celestial bodies and other sources. And then they can actually rebroadcast them locally. So they act like these superconducting antennas that can pick up energies from other places and then rebroadcast it locally. And depending on what material you're working with the monoatomics, so let's say monoatomic gold, the different elements have different frequencies. And they're all in this form, they're all very healing and regenerative. Because they're superconductors, they are being used in a lot of covert technologies. For example, space travel and time travel. Now that may seem like a bunch of new age hoo-hoo crazy nonsense, but I actually have met 3 different people at 3 different occasions, completely serendipitously, wasn't looking for it, who all were working on anti-gravity, time traveling, flying saucer technology for the US military. Some of them since the 1950s. And so this technology really exists, and these superconducting elements are included in this anti-gravity and time travel technology. And it's because these monoatomic elements are interdimensional. They exist in 3D space-time, but they also exist in other frequencies or dimensions of time and space. So let's see here. So where does this stuff come from? How is it created? Well, you can make these monoatomic elements. There's a book called Ormus, Modern Day Alchemy by Chris Emmons, and you can get it on Amazon, places like that. And Chris did a really good job of writing how you can make this stuff alchemically. Real common method is to take some form of whole salt and put it into water with lye, and then precipitate out this powder and rinse it, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't recommend doing that because you can poison yourself that way really easily. You've got to really know what you're doing with this stuff. So, and also too, when you ingest alchemical forms of these monoatomics, if you overdo it, you can raise the superconductivity too fast in the body, and then you will start manifesting things that you did not intend. Because the way that we manifest things, which I'm going to show you a little bit more about, is by consciousness going out and utilizing the energy of consciousness as a form of energy that actually can be converted into matter and electromagnetic energy and things that we actually can see and use. And so when you plug the superconductivity in the body too high, too fast, you'll wind up manifesting things you didn't intend, and you can run into some major problems. I've met people who have done that, had car wrecks and all kinds of things. So you don't want to do that, but you can make it that way. I recommend for people to either buy it from reliable sources, which there are only a very few that I recommend, or you can get it the old-fashioned way in food and in ferments, which I'm going to show you a little bit more about. These monoatomics are created by microbial action in soil, because plants can't uptake boulders through their roots. They can only take in particles that are either individual atoms, which is the Ormus elements, or particles with just a few atoms, maybe a handful of atoms in a particle. Those are known as angstrom or M-state, angstrom particles. And so they've got to be in these small particle sizes to get into plants and have them uptaken. So the microbes are what do that. The microbes eat rocks, break them down into monoatomic and angstrom particles, and then plants can uptake them. And we can also do things with them as well. You can also create these monoatomic elements by vortexing these elements in water inside of magnetic fields, and we'll get more into that. Photosynthesis will create these. So for example, if you know where a source of monoatomic elements are, you can feed these elements to plants. They will create a lot more of the monoatomics in them. Volcanic rock powder is a huge source of these monoatomics for feeding to plants or ferments. And we'll get more into that later about those processes, but basically volcanoes are a major source of these monoatomic elements. And this is why you can go onto YouTube and search on volcano lightning, And you can see when a volcano is erupting, you'll see these lightning bolts shooting up out of the volcano into the sky. And the reason that is because this volcanic ash is really, really finely powdered, and it's high in these monoatomic elements, which creates these superconducting Meissner fields that has a huge electrical potential. And so it's got to ground out, and that's what it does. And so you can take these volcanic rock powders, for example, and either feed them to plants, or you can feed them to ferments like krauts, or using effective microorganisms, which we're going to get into. But this is where these elements come from, and some of the sources of them.